So we will start by understanding what client-side routing is, why it matters, and how React Router helps us manage different views in an app without constantly reloading the page. And here's the agenda for today. We're just going to be we will be understanding about the shift from traditional websites to single page applications, then seeing how React Router helps us create a smoother navigation experience inside a React app. And then we will take a look at some core components like routes, route link, and NavLink. And then we will move into dynamic routes program, and then we'll try to take a closer look at what programmatic navigation is using the useNavigate hook. And then we will also learn about how we take a look at some practices for handling 404s and 404s and creating protected routes. So let's take a look at before we get started with routing, let's take a closer look at how websites used to be back in the day. So when it came to traditional sites, they were structured. The typical structure was close to that of a building with many separate rooms. And whenever you try to click a link on any website, uh, it would uh, it would trigger a response that the browser usually requests a completely new HTML page from the server. So that means that the whole page refreshes, which wasn't a concern back there, but as the time went by, that process was slow and less seamless. And then in a single page, and now when it comes to single page applications, the app typically loads once, and it's kind of like a one big room that constantly redecorates itself. And then the server sends just one HTML file initially, and then all UI updates are handled by JavaScript. So instead of reloading the entire page, we're just swapping what the user sees. And that smoother experience is exactly why tools like React Router are useful, because they help us manage navigation between views in a React app while keeping that fast app-like feel. And then the challenge with single apps is that without a router, the URL kind of stays static, which leads to no use of the back button and all. And if we were to, and then that creates problems because the back button may not behave the way users expect, and it also makes deep linking difficult. So React Router solves that by keeping the UI and URL in sync, which makes navigation feel natural and much easier to manage. And now that we've talked, we've started the conversation. So this brings us to React Router itself. It is one of the most widely used routing libraries in the React ecosystem, and its main job is just keeping your user interface in sync with the browser URL. So to start using it, the first step would be to actually make sure that your project has a React Router. The first step would be to just make sure that a React Router library is installed using npm install React Router, and then once you have installed it, you can wrap your application with browser router itself, just like you can see in the example on the right. You can think of browser router as the component that gives your app routing capabilities, so React Router can listen to the URL and render the right views. And then it is the most popular, as I mentioned, it's the most popular library, and it has been and this library has been maintained by the community, and it is something And this library has been reliant in production environments itself. Now let's talk about how we define those routes in a React application. So the component acts like a container that looks through all the available routes and finds the best match for the current URL. And then inside routes, each route component connects a specific path to a specific component. So when URL matches that path, React Router renders the corresponding elements. So if you can take a closer look at this example on a right, the root part renders the home element, the about renders the about component, and the dashboard route renders the dashboard component. So the big idea here is that routes handles the matching logic while each route defines what should appear on the screen for a given URL. And this path can be defined as anything as long as it starts with a forward slash. Now, once we know how routes are being defined, the next question is how users actually move between those routes. So, and that brings us to navigation with the link component and NavLink component. Now, this would definitely raise some questions like why don't we just use the anchor component as well? That can also help us navigate to different pages of the browser as well. So we so for internal when it comes to internal routing, we would always link component is always preferred over standard anchor tags to prevent full page reloads. Because if we use anchor tags, the browser would treat it like a traditional website, which would cause a full page reload. And then if we try to implement that in a React app, that breaks the smooth single page application experience. But when we use the link component, React Router updates the URL and swaps the view without reloading the entire page. So that way, navigation feels faster and more seamless. And then NavLink does the same thing, but the additional benefit is that it can automatically tell us when a link is active, which makes it easier to style the current page in the navigation bar. And then if you can see the example, but to one thing to notice there is that NavLink is really just a specialized version of Link. It still handles client-side navigation, but it also gives us a convenient way to detect the active route. So in the example on our right, the link to the home page is just a regular link, while the about and dashboard links are nav links. So that means when one of those routes matches the current URL, React Router can automatically apply excuse me, apply an active class. And that is where we could write CSS, where we would define where we would give some color to the active link. It could be gold, it could be brown. It depends upon the style guide of your current page. And once we make that link bold, that so that the current page stands out clearly in the navigation when we navigate between different routes. So now let's move it to dynamic routes because not every page in an app would need its own hard coded path. Sometimes we just want one route pattern to handle many similar pages. A common example would include something like a product page where each product has a different ID, but all of them follow the same general route structure. So we create a dynamic segment by placing a colon before part of the part. So a route like products and then so a route like products for product ID, which mean that product ID is the variable part of the URL. And then if the user, let's say the user wants to visit the product ID 123, it would React router would match that route, and it gives us access to the value 123 as well. And then inside the component, we use the useParams hook to read those dynamic values from the URL, and it returns an object containing the route parameters. So we could access that using the params.product ID property here, and use it inside the page. This is powerful because one route definition can support thousands of different pages without us having to manually create a separate route for every single product. Like imagine creating routes for a thousand products. That is not only exhaustive, but it is really redundant. Now, let's try to take a closer look at programmatic navigation, because sometimes users don't move to a new page just by clicking a link. So, and there are cases where navigation happens just because of application logic, like it could be after a form submission, or after successful login, or after completing some action on the website. So this is where you would want to use a hook called useNavigate. It gives us a function that allows us to change routes directly from our code. And then in this example on our right, we could call useNavigate to get a navigate function. And then inside the handler for login, after preventing the default form behavior and running the authentication logic for login, we could simply use the navigate. We could simply use the navigate function to send the user to the dashboard after a successful login. And then and also use navigate can also help us move through browser history. So if you pass something like -1, it sort of works like a back button as well. As you try to set up different routes and different components, there will be times where when a user will try to revisit a route that does not exist in any application. That is something that should be handled intentionally rather than letting the user land on a broken or blank page. So in React Router, a common way to handle this is by creating a catch-all route using the path, which is determined by this asterisk right here. So that route acts as a safety net for any URL that does not match the URLs that has been explicitly defined by us. So in this example, we have our different routes, like the normal forward slash and the slash about. But at the bottom, we have also added our safety net for unmatched paths. If none of the earlier routes match, then React router falls back to the not found component. And from a user experience standpoint, that not found page should be able to clearly tell the user that this page does not exist, and it gives them a clear way to get back to a valid part of the app, like for example it could be the home page or the about page as well. And then building yes, Taji, I see your hand raised.
So the best example for use navigation would be like a back button, right?
Back button is one example. Yes. So when you use navigate and pass -1 value in there, it's a great way to go back to the previous page. So yeah, that would be one example. But that is not just the only use case. A more common example would be redirecting users after some logic. Let's say that you want to access after some logic runs, like logging in successfully, or submission of a form, or completing any checkout flow. So that while the back button is a valid example, but use navigate is more broadly used anytime navigation needs to happen from JavaScript instead of from a quick click link like the anchor tag.
Okay.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. And let's talk about protecting our routes. So sometimes when a route exists, but there could be cases where we don't want every user to have access to it. And that's where protected routes help us restrict sensitive pages like dashboards for specific users, account settings, or maybe the dashboard could have like an admin page. So the basic idea of protected routes is that we create a wrapper component that checks whether the user is authenticated to access this particular page or not. If the user is authenticated, we render that protected content using outlet. If not, then we just redirect them to another page, which would usually be the login page using navigate itself. And then in this example, the check authentication is the sort of this placeholder function that decides whether the user can access the admin dashboard or not. If it returns true, then the dashboard is returned, or else if the user is not authenticated, they just get redirected to the login component. And here's a quick reference sheet that gives a quick summary of all the main pieces of React Router that we have talked about today. Let's just walk through it briefly. So browser router helps wraps the app and helps us enable routing. And then routes is looks through the available routes and picks us the best route to render. And then route maps a URL path to a component. And then link lets us navigate internally without an full page reload. And the NavLink is a special link component that helps us style the active link. And then useParams is a hook that helps us read dynamic values from the URL. And then use navigate is also another hook that lets us navigate from JavaScript whenever navigation happens because of logic. So it's totally okay if you don't if you don't remember anything just yet. Please note that this entire presentation is recording, and if you want to just remember just one thing, just remember this: React Router helps connect the browser URL to the components shown on the screen, and making navigation in a React app helps feels smooth and structured. So uh, so this is just one quick summaries of all the concepts we've talked about. And I believe that brings us to the end of the presentation portion. I'd like to pause right here and see if you guys have any questions whatsoever about the presentation or any of the concepts we've talked so far. I'm curious to know more for useNav and protection routes. Uh, so Yeah, so let me just give a quick recap of both. So, use navigate is where you want navigation to happen because of logic in your code, not just because a user clicked a link. So, some common examples include redirecting someone after login, or after even sending them back with something like navigate and -1. Protected routes are more about implementing access control. So even if a route exists, we may not want every user to view it. So if we add a wrapper that checks whether the user is authenticated, that helps us protect those routes. Uh, the difference between NavLink and link. So yes, I would definitely explain that. So link is the basic component that you use for navigation inside a React app. It changes the URL for without reloading the page. And NavLink also does client-side navigation, but it has one extra feature. It knows when the link matches the current route, so it can automatically apply styling to it to show that it is active. Now, there's just one. So if you need navigation, link is enough. But if you want navigation plus active state styling in something like a navbar or a sidebar, then navlink is usually the better choice. And also, if you're implementing navlinks, you also want to make sure that you are explicitly setting the active state in the CSS as well. So if even if you let's say if you try to implement a navlink component, but there's no active uh, active styling that is applied in the CSS, so that may still not help you highlight the current link. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Uh, are there any more questions before we move into the coding walkthrough? Okay, if there are no more questions, let's move through the code walkthrough. And from this point, I'll just be focusing on the examples, and and hopefully that should allow you to provide some clarity about all the concepts that we have discussed today. So let me share the screen and let's try to bring up the whole screen instead of VS Code. Okay, so so for this example, we are just building on the example from the last week, and the main thing to notice that is that the app has already been structured. So the first change that has been implemented for implementing routes is that the entire app is wrapped with the browser router, which is what gives the entire application access to React router. So from last week, we may already had the React app rendering normally. So this week, the key addition is that routing support is now just added at the root level. So we just imported the browser router and we have wrapped the app component with the browser router itself. So that means every component inside app can now participate in routing, navigation, and URL based rendering. Uh, yeah, so the reason why we have wrapped this browser router inside the app, so we want to make sure that routing should be available across the whole app, not just one small section. So putting browser router here makes it the top level routing provider, and that way we can ensure navigation across all the components. And now let's take a closer a look at our app component right here. Uh, as you can see, we so this is where all the routing logic is being centralized. And then at the top, you can still see that the app is still using use theme. For those of you who weren't here last week, this is kind of like a function that helps us switch from light mode to dark mode using the context use context hook. And then inside the app content, and then inside our app content, we first set up the outer layout with some inline styles, and then that helps us give the a consistent wrapper before we render any routes. So the key part for this week is where the routes component appear. And then inside it, each route inside the routes component maps a URL path. So the forward slash renders the home component, the shopping renders the shopping list page, and students renders the student directory, and the Pokemon route renders the Pokemon page. And then we can also see that a dynamic route for checking out student profiles. So if we just pass with the student ID 1, ID 2, we are able to see all their profiles only, and that saves us the trouble of manually routing parts for the students that we have considered for this particular application. And as always, there's always the not found. There's also not found page that has been imported, which means that all unmatched URLs are being handled with a fallback route, so users do not end up on a blank screen. If you are familiar with the switch case statements, this is kind of like the default case. And now let's take a look at our home page, where we've just this file is pretty simple, and that is sort of intentional. The home component still uses the theme context provider, so we can just adjust its color based on whether the app is in light mode or dark mode. And then we can see that after all the headers and paragraphs, we could see that the counter component has been imported. And uh, and then the paragraph mentions use memo callback and use effect, which so this home page is still using last week's counter example rather than introducing a brand new feature here. And then the counter component is being rendered directly inside the page. So this route is not just showing static text, it is loading the actual counter feature as the main content for the home route. Let's take a quick example at how it looks. So after refreshing the page, this would so so the asterisk would be URL's way of saying yes, exactly. That would be the URL's way of saying that the website there is no page for this route that has been selected. So yes, that yes, and so I would say that that is our way of saying that this page does not exist in the app, and that is why we would usually connect it to a not found component here, which we can see in this example. It's just a normal page. Well, let's try and add. Let's try to explore the mentor part. There is no mentor path, and then this is what the not found page looks like, and it helps us redirect back to the home page as well. And then this is just all the routes that we can see. The examples still remain the same as they were from last week. The only difference is that you can see in the URL that our routes, the URL keeps on adding different routes, but the examples remain the same. Now, the only addition here is that there is an option to review individual profiles as well. So if we click on any one of them, you can see that the student profile pops up, and there is some information about that particular student. And if we click on each individual student, you can see that there are there's always something different about all these students. And let's see what else has been added. Of course, there is the navbar component as well, which allows us to navigate between different sections in the app itself. And so this is an example of how you can implement client-side routing in action. So this navbar just gives us different links, and as you can see, all the navbar components are linked to our different components as well. An important which is more of a deliberate choice here, and the reason that we are using NavLink instead of PlainLink, it's because this NavLink, this NavLink Navbar needs to show which page is currently active. So as the route changes, the NavLink can automatically update the styling for the current section. And then we also have a helper function called get link style. So that helps us that helps us toggle that helps us it receives the is active as a prop as a yes as a prop. So that lets us yes, because of the routes. That lets us return different styles depending upon whether the current link matches the URL or not. So instead of writing separate logic for every single link, we reuse the same function for the counter shopping list and the Pokemon page as well. And then one thing to notice here is that the link for counter has this specific property called end. And the reason why that property has been added here is that since this link points to our static homepage, which is the root route, so without this end property, React Router may keep that link marked as active, even when we move to other parts, because many URLs still start with the forward slash. So this end property tells React Router to only treat that link as active when the URL matches the root part exactly. So in other words, when we navigate to our home page, that is where the counter component should remain active. But if we try to move to other components, you can see that the counter component is not being rendered at all. Let's see what happens if we don't, if we forget this property by mistake. But let's see if, what happens when we forget this property at all. So I ideally the hang on. So what should really happen is let me make sure if the changes are saved. Let's try to restart the app. And you also want to add the end component there. But right now I'm unable to show exactly why that link would stay highlighted. But it's always a good practice to make sure that the visual difference stays the same. Without end, the home link can stay highlighted on would stay highlighted on other pages, because every route begins with the forward slash. So React Router checks for an exact match before applying the active style here. So uh, I think that's all that I had implemented for this particular session. I just wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions about the examples that we've seen, or any of the concepts from the presentation. Right. So the end prop is mainly for the root link, which is the one pointing to just the forward slash. And the reason is that the forward slash is a prefix of every route in the app. So without the end property, there is a chance that React Router may think that the home link should still count as active even when you are on different pages. So adding that end property tells React to only mark that link as active only when the URL matches that route exactly. Uh, how would you go about setting up a protected route? Okay. So a protected route is usually set up by creating a wrapper component that checks whether the user is authenticated before allowing access to a page. So the pattern to setting up is usually this. If a user is logged in, then we would render the protected content. If they are not logged in, we could redirect them to the login page, and then in React Router, that wrapper often returns outlet when the page when access is allowed, and navigate when access is denied. So let me see how we could set that. Unfortunately, I have not set up a database for our users as well. So implementing implementing that would require some more time, and so that is where I cannot like fully demonstrate what a real product protected route here. But conceptually, the setup would still be the same. We would create a protected route wrapper to check whether the user is logged in and either render the protected page or redirect them to a page that they have access to. So for this example, I just wanted to focus more on the routing concepts themselves. But if we're going to be adding authentication, protected routes would fit naturally on top of this structure. I hope that answers your question. Yes, exactly. So you definitely that is a very real example of where protected routes are used. So on platforms like Twitter, Meta, or Instagram, you may be able to view some public pages, but when you try to look at the comments or maybe create a post that or visit a page that requires authentication, the app would definitely check whether you are logged in first. If you're logged in, it lets you continue. If not, it redirects you to the login page before giving you access. So that is the same protected root idea. It's just applied in a real world app. Okay, let me just stop the recording for today.